I'm very happy to open this event with this speech because it talks about the Bologna stone. And the reason is that the first time in which the Bologna stone became famous in an international context was a place like this one. Because the first occasion in which someone mentioned this Bologna stone in an international context was in 1961 at the IPH Congress. So not a conference like this, but an IPH event. So Emmanuel mentioned this kind of event before. And Liuves, someone who was unknown by me before discovering this, talked about the so-called Bologna stone, saying that, I try to translate, the proportion 1 by square root of 2 is already the basis for 4 formats in 1389 in the marble slab for the Statuti del Popolo in Bologna. For 2 formats exactly, for 2 others approximately. So, in this IPH Congress, Liuves, who came from the City Council of Haarlem in this event in the Netherlands, made internationally known the Bologna stone. And the Bologna stone was, at the end of the 14th century, an inscription affixed on the wall of this building in Bologna. We are here in the Piazza Maggiore in Bologna, and this building is Palazzo d'Accursio, who today is the house of the municipality, but at that time, at the end of the 14th century, it was the palace of the city elders, so il Palazzo degli Anziani. And on the wall of this building, there was several inscriptions, among which this inscription, the Bologna, so-called Bologna stone. You can see it here. Above, there is a text, this one, and I will use a translation to let you understand better. It says, in approximate English, these are the molds of the city of Bologna, which say what the sizes of the sheets of cotton paper must be, which are made in Bologna and the surrounding area, as it is set out here below. And it says below because below, as you saw, there are 4 rectangles, boxed one into another one, and we have the 4 names of these paper sizes, Imperiale, Reale, Mezzane, and Rezzute. The first attestation of this inscription is in a manuscript of the end of the 18th century called Gozzadini manuscript number 67. But the first real discussion and photographic reproduction of the inscription is due to Briquet, who, in the introduction of his dictionary published in 1907, not only talked about the Bologna stone, but also published a picture of the stone. And it was the first time that someone put so much stress and interest on this document. And here you have a part of the introduction by Briquet, and he underlines the several reasons for which the Bologna stone is important. In particular, he says, l'existence à la fin du XIVe siècle d'un règlement fixant les dimensions du papier. It says that this inscription is important because at the end of the 14th century, there was a rulement fixing the paper sizing in an official way in Bologna. And Briquet also gave the measures of these 4 rectangles. And if we compare what he does as numbers with the measures that we can, which have been taken on the stone, we can see that all the 4 sizes respect what is called the principle of the invariant rectangle, which is very interesting because it is the proportion, I am always uncertain about the pronunciation of the name of this man, I'm sorry. But he said that he mentioned this proportion 1 by square root of 2, and that's interesting because it is the proportion we are still respecting nowadays. And the interesting point is that when you have a sheet of paper respecting this invariant rectangle, you can double it or halve it, and the relationship among the sides of the sheets remain constant. So the proportion does not change. So in the case of the 4 sizes of the Bologna stone, the mezzane, for instance, is half the imperiale sheet, and the rezzute is half the reale. But there is a problem with Briquet, because Briquet just mentions the Bologna stone, so the inscription, as an isolated document, kind of. And Andrea Gasparinetti in 1956 pointed it out, and it says here that he does not agree with Briquet, because he says Briquet's view that the plate was a document in and of itself was never shared by us, by him. And he was able to find at the archives in Bologna a document which is a city statute of Bologna dated 1389, in which there is a rulement about the official paper sizing and a clear reference to the Bologna stone affixed on the wall of the Palazzo d'Accursio. And here is the part of the statute in which there is a clear reference to the Bologna stone. The text says, "We decree and order that anyone who makes or shall have made sheets of paper is bound to make them or have them made according to the fixed sizes, which are shown on the marble plaque placed on the wall next to the palace of the city elders, the Palazzi Dominorum Antianorum. And these are the measures for the imperial, royal, median, and chancery sheets." So we find the 4 names of the Bologna stone. So we know that the stone was on the Palazzo d'Accursio, on the wall of Palazzo d'Accursio, but when Briquet refers to the Bologna stone, it was not on the wall of this building, but still on a wall, but of another building, that is a wall inside the Tipografia Merlani, a building located in Bologna at Via Accuse. And here I will show you some old pictures of Bologna, and I can only show old pictures because all this area in Bologna nowadays does not exist anymore, because there was an urbanistic plan in 1889 which completely changed parts of the city, and this area with Via Accuse, Via Spaderie, this street, Rue is French. This street is called the double way, Via Accuse or Via Spaderie, and also Piazza degli Uccelli. All this part is now replaced by Piazza di Re Enzo, so has been destroyed. So only old picture, but here you can see at the end of the street the name of Regia Tipografia Merlani, and that building was at that time the place where the Bologna stone was located. This building, before being the headquarters of a printing house, was the headquarters of the Guild of the Pharmacists in Bologna, la Società degli Speziali. And that's an important point, because there is a strong relationship between the Speziali and the field of paper, because paper makers were submitted to the Guild of the Pharmacists at that time. So here you can see what remained of the area with Via Accuse, Via Spaderie in 1913, after the end of this urbanistic plan in 1889. Luckily, the stone was removed from the Tipografia Merlani and donated to the Museo Civico in 1912. So it's nowadays still in the lapidarium of the Museo Civico in Bologna. And this strong relationship between the Speziali, so the Guild of the Pharmacists, and the paper makers is also confirmed by the fact that on the sides of the Bologna stone there are the emblems of the Speziali. So these are the symbols, the mortars and the pestles. And that's also a questioning point about the Bologna stone, but I will talk about it in a moment. And here, from a bulf by the Cardinal Bessarione, we can find the confirmation that the paper makers, but also people who were taking rubs, were submitted to the Guild of the Pharmacists, or of the pharmacists. Now, the title of my speech is The Latest Discoveries, because these discoveries are really recent and have also a lot of still mysteries for me, because I am still continuing with this, going on with this research. And one of the mysteries about the Bologna stone is the location. Because Briquet, we are still here in the introduction of the dictionary, he mentions this place, Borgo Polese, and Briquet here says that he says what we already know, that before being at the Tipografia Merlani, he says that Tipografia Merlani, before being Tipografia Merlani, was the headquarters of the pharmacists, and that the paper makers were obbedienti privilegiati. So he also mentions this point in Italian. So they were submitted to the Guild of the Pharmacists. But also he says that the plaque de marbre, so the marble slab, was in a suburb area around Bologna called Borgo Polese. And also he mentions this legendary person, paper maker coming from Fabriano to Bologna, but this figure of Polese from Fabriano is a legend, as Gasparinetti proved and says in the article I mentioned below. But I think that not all this history about Borgo Polese is legend. Borgo Polese is actually is a street in Bologna, and we have to we can consider this history of the location of the Bologna stone from another point of view, which is offered by Pierangelo Bellettini. Because Pierangelo Bellettini, in this Cartiere and Cartari, studied the history of paper making and paper mills in Bologna in the 18th century, and he described the paper mills of Bologna. Bologna had the characteristic of having paper mills in the city, or close. So he talks about urban paper mills, and two of these urban paper mills, called La Buca and Stradello, were managed by a family, a historical family in the paper making, printing history of Bologna, the family Sassi. And this family Sassi managed not only these Buca and Stradello paper mills, but they also owned the building in Via Accuse. So they owned the building which was the headquarters of the Speziali, and which will become later on the Tipografia Merlani. And that's because the Tinti and Merlani, so the printing house Merlani, acquired the Tipografia Sassi in 1854. So one possibility is that, indeed, the Bologna stone was located in Borgo Polese in a period in which the family Sassi was still active and also owned at the same time the building in Via Accuse, Via Spaderie. So here you can see the chronology of Tipografia Sassi, then Merlani, and mainly the fact that Sassi's home was Merlani's home. And so the movement of the Bologna stone in Bologna. Another questioning point is the date. And that's a point Briquet discussed a lot with Carlo Malagola, who was at that time the director of the archives in Bologna. And they exchanged a lot of letters in those years, not only about the date, but not only about the Bologna stone in general, but about a lot of other topics. But in particular, one letter is about the date of this inscription, and Briquet finally trusts the advice of Malagola, who suggested that the stone, which is not dated, that's the problem, there are no clear dates on the Bologna stone. Malagola compared the paleographic features of the inscription with this other inscription, which is in the Chiesa di San Pietro, in St. Peter Church in Bologna, and that's an inscription for the reconstruction of the sacristy of this church, and it is dated 1398. So that's the letter in which they are discussing, because Briquet was a bit suspicious. He was not completely convinced at the beginning, but finally he agrees with Malagola. And if we compare the letters of the two inscriptions, we can see that indeed, from the paleographic point of view, we could date the inscription. We can date the inscription of the Bologna stone at the end of the 14th century. But there are a lot of but in the history of the Bologna stone. Here you have, again, the emblem, the symbol of the Guild of the Pharmacists. And the style of the mortar and pestle has been questioned because the way in which these emblems are represented on the stone has been dated to maybe a later stage than the 14th century by some historians of art. And according to these other scholars, the style of the emblems could be more 16th, 17th century than 14th century. And this goes with a new and recent, quite recent hypothesis for which the stone that we see today at the museum is not the original stone, but a 16th, 17th copy of the medieval original. The idea is that, the scholars who think that the stone we see at the museum is a copy say that since the Bologna stone has these emblems of the Speziali, and the inscription was originally on the wall of the city of the house of the municipality, it could be strange that an inscription with the symbols of one of the city's guilds could be displayed on a public building. So why the Guild of the Pharmacists could have a document with their emblems on the wall of the public building of the municipality. So the idea is that probably the original stone was being damaged by the weather or some other, the time passing, and the Guild of the Pharmacists, since they were controlling all the paper field, they were in charge of doing a new copy at a later stage, and so at that time the emblems were added to the copy. But if we compare the emblems of the reliquary of the head of San Petronius in Bologna, that you can see here, dated for sure at 1380, the style is not that different. So this is an opening, an open question, an open point. And also there is the point of the material, because I am always talking about stone, but all the sources talk about marble. And from the Gozzadini manuscript to the most recent studies about the inscription, we talk about marble. But if you go to the museum and have a look at the inscription, you can see that it's limestone, it's stone, there is no doubt. So if we take the hypothesis that it's a copy, we can imagine that the medieval original inscription was on marble and then that the copy is on stone. Or we can also think and notice that it's a kind of fashion way to call the stone marble, because still nowadays these are current definitions of marble in the nowadays dictionaries in several languages, and when we talk about marble, the definitions talk also about stone, limestone, pietra d'Istria. So there is a kind of ambiguity between what is marble, what is stone, and maybe it was just a way of talking about the stone, calling it marble. And just some tra parentheses, I just add that while I was studying this topic during the pandemic, I was reading the research of La Recherche by Proust, and when he describes Venice, for instance, so we are in the 19th century, and he always talks about Venice using the word marble. But we know that Venice is made by limestone. So it's really a current use to use the word marble when we are talking about limestone. So even the point of the material could be an explanation for the idea, the hypothesis of the copy, but also not at all. And also there is another point, which is the role of the speciali, because this is the way in which the text of the statute continues, and we can see that the speciali were engaged not only for controlling that the right implementation of the law, but also for marking, at the end of the text, marking the capse and forme cartarum. So they put their emblems on the decals and on the paper molds. And maybe this could be also an explanation for justifying the fact that the emblems could have been present on the stone from the beginning, without thinking of a copy and with the later addition of the emblems on the stone. So here are just some brainstorming random hypotheses combining the different possibilities that we have for the date, the location, the material, the placement of the stone. Here you have all the sources that talk about the Bologna stone. So you can see that there is a gap between this Gozzadini manuscript and then sources that just mention the stone, then Briquet, who finally drew attention and published an image, and then the later sources, Gasparinetti, Liuves, then put the Bologna stone in relation to the Bologna city statute. and some bibliography that I used for this presentation, which finishes here with a lot of, as you see, open questions, and maybe Silvia wanted to take pictures of the video. So, and I finish here, and I mean, if you have any suggestions or ideas, or I'm open to hear from you. Thank you.